recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home, described by sources as potentially critical evidence, now sitting in an FBI laboratory, undergoing the kind of analysis that can, in the right circumstances, tell investigators exactly who they are looking for.
Every crime scene tells a story, but the one outside Nancy Guthrie's home has been telling investigators something nobody wanted to hear. A retired FBI profiler studying the blood evidence left on her front walkway says the spatter pattern points to a level of planning that should chill every person watching this case. What he discovered may finally reveal who walked out of that home carrying an 84-year-old grandmother into the night. The hair that changed everything. The most important piece of evidence in this entire case is no bigger than a strand of thread. It is a single, rootless hair pulled from inside the home of an 84-year-old grandmother, and for weeks it sat inside a private laboratory in Florida while pressure mounted from every direction. Then, somewhere around the middle of April this year, that fragile sample was finally placed inside a sealed evidence package and shipped across the country to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Federal officials confirmed the development through public statements that carried unusual sharpness. The FBI Assistant Director for Public Affairs, Ben Williamson, posted a clarification stating that the FBI had requested the material more than 2 months earlier, and that the Pima County Sheriff's Office had instead sent it to a private lab in Florida. He noted that 11 full weeks had passed before that lab finally transferred the original hair sample to the federal laboratory for testing. The Pima County Sheriff's Office quickly responded, insisting it had worked with the FBI from the beginning. The lab, now expected to take over the most sensitive part of the analysis, is a small but legendary operation in Santa Cruz, California, called Astrea Forensics. This is the same laboratory that cracked the Gilgo Beach serial killer case using whole genome sequencing on rootless hairs, and the same operation that produced the evidence that convinced Rex Heuermann to plead guilty earlier in April this year to the death of 8 women. The renowned genetic genealogist Cece Moore told reporters that she felt fairly confident investigators would want to use the laboratory they had already used so successfully. She called sending the sample to Astrea by far the safest option available. What lies inside that hair could rewrite the entire case. If scientists can extract a clean genetic profile, they may upload it to genealogy databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Then use a proprietary algorithm to identify distant relatives and slowly walk that family tree backwards toward a name. The hair sits under a sequencer right now, waiting to give up its secrets. But to understand why every fragment of genetic material matters so much, you need to step back to the night this nightmare began. The 41 minutes that vanished. The night of Saturday, the 31st of January this year, began the way thousands of evenings in the Catalina foothills had begun before. Nancy took an Uber to her daughter Annie's home for dinner around 5:30, settled in for a quiet family meal, and was driven home by her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, just before 10 in the evening. Surveillance from her own driveway captured the garage door closing 2 minutes later. By every measure, she was safe inside her own home. What happened next unfolded across exactly 41 minutes that investigators have studied frame by frame. At 1:47 in the morning, the Nest doorbell camera mounted at her front door went dark. Someone wearing gloves, a ski mask, and dark clothing stepped onto the porch and tampered with the device. The figure carried a flashlight in his mouth, attempted to knock the doorbell off its mount, and then covered the lens with leaves pulled from a potted plant on the porch. The motion sensor still registered movement at 12 minutes past 2, but by then the camera could no longer see what was happening. Then, at 28 minutes past 2 in the morning, something extraordinary occurred. Nancy's pacemaker app lost its Bluetooth connection with her iPhone. That detail alone has become the single most important forensic anchor in the entire case, because the device only stays connected within roughly 30 feet. Inside the home, her car keys, her wallet, her mobile phone, and her daily heart medication were all left behind. Her vehicle remained parked in the garage. Her front doors were left propped open in a way that struck her family as unmistakable when they arrived hours later. A trail of blood ran a short distance down the front walkway and then stopped, as though the person carrying her had paused, lifted her completely off the ground, and continued without leaving another drop. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente later observed that the abduction likely involved her being lifted face up so that no further blood would mark the path. Nancy was 84 years old. She wore a pacemaker. She took medication every single day for a chronic heart condition. The sheriff himself would later say she could not walk 50 yards by herself. Whoever entered her home that night did not stumble in by accident. They came prepared. They came patient. And they came with a plan that took exactly 41 minutes to execute. The identity of that figure is what every laboratory and every detective in the country now wants to know. The mixed DNA puzzle. Inside the home. Forensic experts who have spoken publicly about this case all use the same word when they describe the genetic evidence collected from inside the home. They call it a mixture, and a mixture in the world of forensic science is rarely a small problem. It means more than one person's genetic material has been deposited in the same sample, often in overlapping layers that confuse the equipment used to read them. Imagine trying to listen to two people speaking the exact same sentence at the exact same volume, only slightly out of sync. That is what scientists are working with right now. Sheriff Chris Nanos described the situation in plain terms during a recent interview, explaining that the laboratory must separate the DNA strand by strand and still preserve enough of the sample for any future defense team to retest the material if an arrest is ever made. He acknowledged that the process could take up to 6 additional months. The mixed samples have already been compared against the federal Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS, which contains nearly 26 million profiles. Not a single profile inside that database returned a match. That single fact tells investigators something significant. Whoever left their genetic material inside Nancy's home has either never been arrested for a serious crime or has somehow avoided ever being entered into the federal system. By building outward from a partial match, investigators can construct a family tree that eventually narrows to a small group of candidates who fit the timeline and the geography. The challenge is that mixed DNA and partial samples make this kind of tree building dramatically more difficult. There is also a separate piece of evidence that has captured public attention. Roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, searchers recovered a single black glove that appeared to visually match the gloves worn by the masked figure on the doorbell footage. The glove returned no match in the federal database, but reporters at CBS News later traced the genetic material to a local restaurant worker who had absolutely no connection to the case. That dead end has made every remaining piece of evidence inside the home matter even more. But inside the most secure laboratories in the country, scientists are not the only ones racing against the clock. Roughly 60 miles south of Nancy's home, another moment of high-pressure law enforcement was already unfolding in ways no one could have predicted. The wrong man in Rio Rico. On the evening of Tuesday, the 10th of February this year, hours after FBI Director Kash Patel personally posted 4 black and white images of the masked intruder on his social media account, deputies executed one of the most dramatic operations of the entire investigation. The location was Rio Rico, a small border community roughly 15 miles from the Nogales port of entry into Mexico. The target was a 36-year-old DoorDash delivery driver named Carlos Palazuelos, a man with a wife and children working long hours to provide for his family. Marked vehicles surrounded his car. Officers approached with weapons drawn. He was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car for what would become a 6 to 7 hour ordeal. A search warrant signed by a Santa Cruz County judge in Arizona was executed simultaneously at his home and at a vehicle in a restaurant parking lot. Front and back doors were forcibly opened and electronics were seized. According to ABC News, Palazuelos had been on the radar of investigators before Director Patel ever released those photographs, identified through what officials described as a series of electronic investigative tools including cell phone usage information and traffic data. That language strongly suggests cell tower pings and possibly automated license plate reader hits placed his vehicle within a wide radius of relevant locations during relevant time windows. Palazuelos was eventually released without a single charge being filed against him. He gave multiple interviews telling reporters the experience had been terrifying, recalling that he asked officers directly who exactly he was supposed to have kidnapped. His attorney, Jesse Showalter, has been the most forceful voice demanding public exoneration. He told ABC 15 the family was now living day to day in fear and that he wanted Sheriff Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Office to come forward and admit they had made a mistake. The toll on this small border family has been devastating. Reports of being followed by a red truck, of harassment, and of difficulty maintaining work have become part of their daily life. The sealed search warrant that authorized the entire Rio Rico operation has not been made public, leaving a community wondering exactly what evidence convinced a judge to sign off on such an aggressive intervention. The Rio Rico raid did not crack the case. What it cracked instead was public confidence. And while the streets of southern Arizona absorbed the shock of an investigation searching frantically for traction, a far more sinister parallel story was already unfolding behind closed federal courthouse doors. The imposter who wanted 12 Bitcoin. Within hours of the Guthrie family posting their first heart-wrenching public plea on the 4th of February, a series of text messages began arriving on the phones of two of Nancy's closest relatives. The messages asked whether the family had received the Bitcoin yet, suggesting whoever was on the other end was waiting for the cryptocurrency transfer to be completed. A 9-second anonymous call also arrived from the same source. Federal investigators traced the activity to a voice-over Internet protocol number, walked the digital trail back to a Gmail account, and then to a home in Hawthorne, California. The man arrested at that residence was Derek Colella, a 42-year-old intermediate clerk for the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. According to the federal complaint, after being read his rights, he admitted he had been following the case on television and had pulled the family's contact information from what he described as a cyber website. He told investigators he wanted 12 Bitcoin from a grieving family who had just stood in front of cameras pleading for their mother's safe return. His trial date has been formally set for the 23rd of June this year inside the federal courthouse in Tucson. In October of last year, the same man had already been charged by the Los Angeles County District Attorney as one of 13 county employees allegedly involved in stealing more than $400,000 in California unemployment benefits. Colella was only one part of a far stranger Ransom story. The original Ransom communication, the one the family believes was sent by people actually involved in the abduction, arrived at a Tucson television station and at the celebrity news outlet TMZ within 48 hours of the disappearance. It contained specific details about Nancy's home and what she had been wearing, and demanded millions in Bitcoin transferred to a specific wallet with deadlines of the 5th and 9th of February. Both deadlines passed without payment, and that wallet has remained essentially empty ever since. Then, on the 6th of April this year, the same day Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show after a 2-month absence, 2 new emails landed in the inbox of the same outlet. The sender claimed to know where Nancy's body was being held and offered the kidnapper's name in exchange for half a Bitcoin. Even more dramatically, the sender claimed to have personally seen Nancy alive in the Mexican state of Sonora. No federal agency has authenticated that claim. This is the strange and tangled web that has surrounded the Guthrie family since the very first day. And as if that were not enough, the lead investigator running the entire operation was about to face a crisis of his own that has shaken the very foundation of his ability to lead. Sheriff Chris Nanos won his current position by exactly 481 votes in the 2024 election. Today, the man who narrowly captured the office of Chief Law Enforcement Officer in Pima County is facing a political storm that may swallow his career before this case reaches its conclusion. The trouble began with a court deposition taken in December of last year, in which Sheriff Nanos swore under oath that he had never been suspended during his decades-long career in law enforcement. Records reviewed by the Arizona Republic told a very different story, showing he had been suspended 8 times at the El Paso Police Department between 1976 and 1982, including a 15-day penalty for excessive force after he reportedly beat a handcuffed suspect badly enough to require hospital care. The deputies' union has since passed a unanimous no-confidence motion against him. While the leadership of the lead agency battles its own demons, the people who actually live in the neighborhood where Nancy disappeared have been quietly piecing together a story of their own that nobody wants to hear out loud. The walker, the cars, and the vehicles that passed in the night. 3 weeks before Nancy was taken, a longtime resident of the Catalina foothills named Aldine Meister noticed something unusual in her quiet neighborhood. She told reporters at Fox News Digital that on the 11th of January this year, she observed a man walking near the intersection leading to Nancy's home who simply did not belong. She described him as younger than the typical resident, dressed without the usual walking gear, with his hat pulled deeply over his eyes. She admitted on a popular investigative podcast that the encounter genuinely unsettled her, even though she described herself as someone not easily rattled. She told the FBI about the encounter the very day after agents first knocked on her door. Another neighbor, Michelle Young, confirmed that investigators returned to her own home 5 separate times, asking specifically about that same date. Roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, just outside the official 2-mile radius the sheriff's office had requested footage from, a couple named Elias and Danielle Strategoulias captured something equally unsettling. Their Ring camera, mounted at street level, recorded 12 different vehicles passing on their road between midnight and 6 in the morning on the day Nancy disappeared. One particular clip, captured at 36 minutes past 2 in the morning, came exactly 8 minutes after the pacemaker disconnection. A retired New York Police Department detective named Pat Brosnan reviewed the footage and identified the vehicle as likely a Kia Soul based on the configuration of its vertical brake lights. Other reporting from the Arizona Daily Star described the vehicle more generally as a light-colored sport utility vehicle. Yet another neighbor, who asked to remain anonymous, told reporters about a man seen on the 2nd of February near a different intersection in the same neighborhood. The man was described as roughly 5 feet 9 inches tall, with a Hispanic appearance and a close-trimmed beard, wearing a silver bracelet and smoking a cigarette while standing near a dark red Honda sport utility vehicle that had not moved from its parking spot in 3 full days. These 3 vehicle threads, the Kia Soul, the light-colored sport utility vehicle, and the dark red Honda, have not yet been definitively connected to one another by investigators. Inside the home of Nancy Guthrie, 86 days have now passed without her presence. Outside that home, an entire family continues to wait. Savannah, in her first interview with her co-anchor and dear friend Hoda Kotb, said she wakes up every night in the middle of the night and imagines her mother's terror in the darkness. She also said she heard a voice telling her she knew where her mother was. The family has now offered a reward of $1 million and donated $500,000 more to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The total reward pool now exceeds $1.25 million. What happens next will likely arrive in one of 3 places. It may come from a sequencing machine in California producing the first usable genetic profile. It may come from a federal courtroom in Tucson when a small-time imposter faces trial and unintentionally cracks open new threads. So what do you think really happened to Nancy Guthrie? And which of these threads do you believe will finally crack this case wide open? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know who you think holds the key to bringing her home.